There comes a point in every restoration project when you have to determine what you're going to do to repair the car's body. And unfortunately, it really doesn't matter what the car looked like when it comes into the shop. It might have nice paint, it might be shiny, but they are always hiding secrets underneath. And we try and tell people this as much as we can, because even though the car looks good, you got to remember this thing is over 40 years old, and you don't know what had happened to it throughout its life. It might have been crashed, it might have had rust repair. It's going to be hiding some secrets under the paint. So I think it's important to kind of expect that if you're going to do a restoration on an old car. My advice is to always try and find a car that came from a climate that doesn't have a lot of snow and salt on the roads, because that's what rusts these old cars. So we try and find cars that come from the Southwest or desert climates, but even then the car might not have lived there its whole life. So it's kind of an agitating subject to think that even though it looks good when you start, you might peel the layers back and find that it needs extensive metal repair. But you just kind of have to be prepared to do that, because like I said, these cars are kind of old, and that's just part of the game. And it was no different on the Lose Change Camaro. This car was nice and shiny and pretty straight when it came in, and once we sent the body to the media blaster, we found that it had a whole slew of previous repair work done that might have been fine for somebody in the garage doing a low buck restoration on the car, but it wasn't restored to its factory style condition. There was patch panels put in that were kind of poorly made. There was even galvanized steel in the cowl sections in the front that looked like it came out of somebody's gutters. The wheel tubs were repaired kind of poorly, and then there was, in some cases, almost a ½ inch thick of like roofing tar throughout the trunk floor and on the bottom side of the car, and all this was hiding previous repair work, and we found all kinds of stuff that we wanted to replace to make this car really nice. Once the car got media blasted, we took some time to photograph it and make notes of the panels that we knew we were going to replace. For example, the tail pan on this car was punched full of holes from a previous wreck. And then we clean the body. We try and blow all the sand out of it and wipe it down with some wax and grease remover. And we shoot the bare steel in a black epoxy primer. And this is done to protect all the steel. We don't put a lot of material on panels that we know we're going to remove to save material. But after the body was primed with its black epoxy, we began the process of changing some of the rusty panels. One specific area that needed a lot of help on this car was the dash panel. Apparently it had a leaky windshield for many, many years and was rusty wherever the windshield glass mated to the dash. So we decided to replace that panel in its entirety. We got a new dash panel from Classic Industries along with an upper cowl panel. And the trick to replacing these is finding all the original resistant spot welds and drilling them out, and then separating that seam in the same place it was put together from the factory. You got to remember that these cars were meant to be repaired this way when they were new, because if you got in a wreck, you could go to a body shop and they would disassemble the car and put new panels back in, and that's all we did on the dashboard. When it came to some other areas of the firewall, we had to do a little bit of a dance, because we had already spent some time to make our transmission tunnel fit properly, and we modified the front of the firewall a little bit. So we learned that the toe board areas had both rusted out behind the front supports where the Camaro's body bolts to the subframe. So in this case, we found it was cheaper to find a whole replacement lower firewall panel from Classic Industries, but just use pieces of it. We drilled off the original toe board supports and body mounts and peeled those off the original lower firewall, and then carefully cut out the rusty metal, and then took the new piece and cut some patches from it and trimmed them to fit the holes and welded those back together. And the process we use is a butt weld technique. So once you MIG weld all of these pieces back in place and take a few minutes to grind the welds down, you can never tell that a repair ever occurred. And then of course we reattached the body mount braces back to the lower part of the car, and we used our chassis jig along with measurements before and after to make sure that those pieces went back on in the same place so that the car was square and true. The new panels from Classic Industries arrive wearing what's called an E-coat, or an electrostatic primer. It's black, and it's designed to protect these panels. And in some cases, that E-coat is good enough to use throughout the restoration process. You're going to damage it when you cut it and weld on it, so in those areas we use a weld-through primer from HTP. But we also will scuff and kind of gauge the level of adhesion that E-coat has, because if it seems like it's going to flake off or it's not going to be a super strong adhesion, we'll go ahead and strip the whole panel and then reprime it with a black epoxy. No matter what, after the welding and fabrication work is done, the area is scuffed and epoxied again to make sure that we have some corrosion resistance so that these repairs hopefully won't be necessary in the future. There's a common area where most of these Camaros rust, and it is the lower portion of what we call the cowl boxes. The design of these cars allow leaves and dirt and dust to come down through the cowl screen at the back of the hood, and they tend to collect down between the bottom of the fender and this cowl panel. So there's a couple ways to repair it. If it's really rusty, you can cut the whole piece out and get a complete pre-assembled replacement from Classic Industries. They sell both left and right cowl boxes for this purpose. Or if you find that the rust damage is confined to just the outside of the panel, you can get a replacement cowl panel skin. And that's what we used on this car. We were able to remove the original skin, drilling out all the spot welds. Once we had that area open inside, we did some measures to keep it from rusting in the future, some epoxy and some weld-through primer, and then attached the new skin using a plug weld method, which made sure that it was sealed up just as tight as it was from the factory. So the good thing is, even if you've got a car that has a bunch of rust in it, you don't have to worry too much because they make every panel for these to restore them. And in our case, our dash came out real nice, the cowl boxes and the floor area in the front, you can never tell that the repairs ever happened. But this is kind of the beginning because we're still going to do some more work in the floors. We've got some quarter panel and trunk floor and tail pan work to do, along with some custom work in the wheel tubs to accommodate a bigger tire. So we're going to show you all that in the next chapters.